Um, I just want to start by saying thank you. It's really great to be able to join you in this good discussion in the context of the forum to follow the next couple of days. And I'm very sorry I wasn't able to join you in person, but I'm just as dedicated from far away here. So I did switch off my camera a little bit and then turn it back on because it does tend to cut off. So if that happens and you don't see me, it's because I'm probably not able to hear you later on. Georgi asked me to locate the prevention debate, which is the focus of our pre-event today, within the broader responsibility to protect framework. So I'm going to start with this today. But before that, I want to just say a few words in regards to our center, the European Center for the Responsibility to Protect, which we did launch here at the University of Leeds, but it's in partnership, of course, with the Budapest Center for Mass Atrocity Prevention and the Hague Institute for Global Justice. Just to follow up on Georgi's initial invitation for all of you to check our website for more details. And we launched this center, not because we felt there's the need for yet another academic center, but because we wanted to collaborate with our partners in terms of research, education, and policy dialogue especially. And we put together a European network of scholars and researchers, so we are coordinating it for the center. And we collaborate with the only other regional-based center of its kind, which is the Asia-Pacific Center for the Responsibility to Protect in Australia at the University of Queensland. We do collaborate with the Global Center for R2P in New York and the UN Office on Genocide Prevention and the Responsibility to Protect. We try to focus on the policies and practices of the European states and of the European Union in regards to the responsibility to protect and prevention as one component of this. And I'm going to talk about it today, of course. And we also thought last year when we launched the center that it's a really, it's always a timely moment to be studying these issues. But in some respects, we launched the center at a particularly significant moment in European history, the rise of populist movements across the continent. This reminds us that Europe is not immune at all to political extremism, and Europe's response to atrocity, crime, and refugee flows across its borders really called into question the depth of the European commitment to the responsibility to protect. So we did realize with the center and this partnership that the real potential for the responsibility to protect rests not so much in the debates we have as academics, and I'm talking about myself here, the ivory tower, or the legality of R2P attempts to do, but in its ability to mobilize our capacity so that we might focus on the practical side of things, like Andras was saying earlier, and to assist basically those who make the hard decisions to save lives, if we can, for research and policy impact. And when we think about the most important initiatives in this sense, in terms of atrocity prevention at the European Union level, I just want to mention the Task Force for Atrocity Prevention, which is, of course, something that the Budapest Center for Mass Atrocity Prevention worked on, played a key role. So we want to do more of this kind of efforts. Now, on actually the title in the program for my presentation, Accountability for Prevention, is the focus of this year's annual report of the UN Secretary General on the responsibility to protect. And as Georgi mentioned, I did get a chance to help in terms of contributions towards this annual report. And I'm just going to locate this in terms of what the focus seems to be now when we talk about the responsibility to protect, namely atrocity prevention. This is very much in line with the theme the broader theme of this pre-event to the forum and the forum, of course, all together. The UN Special Advisor on the Responsibility to Protect Dr. Ivan Simonovic, who took office late 2016, this was his first report as a special advisor to the Secretary General on R2P, and his choice was to focus on prevention and particularly on accountability of different actors for basically failing to prevent and prevent atrocity crimes. And his office is currently working on a prevention assessment compendium basically to suit the instances to assess what are some of the examples in which, you know, the world did the right thing, responded the right way, and what can we learn from all these failures we know so much sadly about. And we heard examples mentioned in the keynote speech. Andras talked about the Yazidis population in Iraq, or the Rohingyas in Myanmar. We're reminded every day when we watch the news. But prevention seems to be placed at the center of how we approach responsibility to protect and the broader framework today. And this is what I'm going to talk about. We have now some guidelines on how to make atrocity prevention a practical program of action. The Human Rights Upfront Action Plan at the UN, this was the major initiative under Ban Ki-moon, the previous Secretary General, but something that continues under Guterres. And the whole idea behind human rights upfront, placing respect for human rights before anything else, was to achieve UN prevention mandates through cultural and operational change, and above everything else, engagement with member states. So it's intended to, it was intended to improve early warning, support for national authorities, and international accountability. And all the reviews, the recent reviews the UN did on peace operations, the peace building architecture, on women, peace and security, all of them underscored the need for an overall shift of resources and shift of priorities of the UN and regional actors towards prevention. As was emphasized in the keynote speech, prevention is very important, and it is so much better to do prevention as opposed to simply focus on reaction. How do we react to crisis? We talk about the practical practitioner's point of view, and now I'll just add a little bit from the academic point of view. So as you know, every year we have the General Assembly annual debates in September at the United Nations in New York, going over the main tenets of that particular year's annual report of the Secretary General, and we hear every year how member states commit to supporting the prevention of atrocity crimes. We have national R2P focal points. So this position, a national R2P focal point, would be a senior level official responsible for mainstreaming R2P and atrocity prevention at the government level. In different states, about 60 member states now have this program in place. It's 60 out of 193, but it still works. And actually, in May this year, was the last time I had the pleasure of seeing Georgi in person in Ljubljana at the 2017 gathering of the European Union National R2P focal points. So there are initiatives like this at the European level, and broadly speaking at the international level. The European Union is actually the only regional organization that established an R2P focal point. So it's Mr. Christian Leffler from the External Action Service. There are efforts in this sense, and I'm going to actually now switch to a focus of R2P in the European context. But still trying to clarify some important distinctions in relation to prevention and how we do prevention under the responsibility to protect framework, in particular distinctions between conflict prevention and atrocity prevention. So the first thing that comes up in discussions with European Union policymakers, with bureaucrats, with diplomats in New York or in Brussels, is the importance we place on the research side or academic side of things on calling a certain type of work or what policymakers do, labeling the work international regional actors do as R2P. So this is one thing that's very important, I think, to clarify. And Georgi asked me to speak about R2P more broadly and locate prevention in this context. I think I want to make this point clearly. The way the responsibility, the way certain work is labeled R2P or not is very important for the research we're doing. So the European Union is currently facing a whole set of internal, external challenges related to operationalizing the responsibility to protect in the European Union policy. It relates mostly to the European Union's bureaucratic reluctance to switch focus, but also to different positions amongst members, key members of the European Union in regards to their responsibility to protect, and in regards especially to what we call Pillar 3 of the responsibility to protect, which includes the use of force to protect, of the type we've seen in Libya earlier in 2011. So at the first glance, the European Union is taking the right steps in regards to embracing the responsibility to protect. It has a very active group of national focal points, so national R2P focal points I talked about briefly earlier. It is the first and only regional organization to date to appoint an R2P regional focal point. The very senior figure in the External Action Service I mentioned. And when researchers engage with bureaucrats on the work of the European Union on R2P, in this particular instance, it was a conversation with the European Union delegation at the UN. They emphasize all these and how the delegation is basically sending diplomats to all focal points, meetings, everything that's going on in Brussels and New York in regards to R2P. The European Union delegation to the UN has been very, very active in the group of so-called group of friends of R2P. There's one in New York, there's one in Geneva. And it's one of the priorities of the EU delegation to the UN, one of their priorities for the United Nations. They are very active at every annual General Assembly debate on R2P September. They include R2P in all their priority papers on a regular basis. In terms of more concrete examples, since we're talking about accountability, one very interesting initiative, the European Union delegation acted as the penholder on the General Assembly resolution on the Republic of Korea. They prepared a draft text. They included the reference to Korea's responsibility to protect its populations. They consulted with member states. And that was an important mention of R2P in this draft resolution back in 2014. And as we know, I mean, we do talk about North Korea a lot now, but until 2015, there wasn't much attention. We didn't pay attention to North Korea as a case of gross violations of human rights. But it was in November 2014 that the Third Committee of the UN General Assembly passed this resolution that referred to R2P and called on the UN Security Council to refer the situation in Korea to the International Criminal Court and to adopt targeted sanctions. So this is an example, a concrete example of the EU delegation to the UN doing things in New York. Now, when we look at Brussels, what's going on in Brussels, the European Union diplomats and policymakers always say that the European Union is doing the responsibility to protect via conflict prevention. So through mediation efforts, through political dialogue, through human rights dialogue, through genocide prevention efforts. And this is when I want to go back to my earlier point on labels or labeling something as the responsibility to protect. Because in this particular instance, at least before September of this year, the European Union position would be we're doing everything the responsibility to protect is and should be, but without labeling it as R2P. The operational side of the responsibility to protect, since we've been talking, well, you've been talking earlier in the question and answer period on about the practical side of things. So the operational side of the responsibility to protect, the European Union people would say, is about aiming to prevent mass atrocity crimes. R2P is about prevention, first and foremost, including prevention of mass atrocity crimes, the three crimes: genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. So prevention is the core of the responsibility to protect. There's no doubt about it. But what's also important to keep in mind is that now we do see prevention as the main game in town at the UN, at least in New York, but also in Brussels. So prevention is what the UN, the current UN Secretary General Guterres has repeatedly said, that he wants to make prevention a priority for the United Nations. The previous Secretary General said the same thing, Ban Ki-moon. He declared 2012, I think it was, the year of prevention. The interesting thing, and I want to mention this as well, and I'll focus on some important distinctions in a few minutes, is to ask how the responsibility to protect was included in the 2016, the foreign and security policy of the European Union. So when we look at the 2016 Global Strategy on Foreign and Security Policy, there is only one reference to R2P and a rather indirect reference to the concept. And it's in the section on global governance for the 21st century. But it's not, if you're interested in looking where it is, it's not under implementation or how do we make R2P work. It's under widening in the context of the European Union promotion of the responsibility
Cristina.
to protect, in addition to promotion of international humanitarian law. Yes?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
If your time is limited, so
Oh!
yeah.
Are you going to enforce a 15-minute?
Please try to conclude in some way, and then we shall pose your questions. I think so.
You should probably question. Okay, after all I've been through to express that I was there and you didn't hear me. Right. So I can definitely talk about more details on where the European Union is with that. My warning is that we should be careful when, and this is something we see in EU policy documents, R2P is sometimes conflated with conflict prevention because of some clear differences between conflict prevention and atrocity prevention. Now, it's gonna be interesting to see how the European Union focuses specifically on atrocity prevention, as other regional partnerships do, for instance, the United Nations with African Union, and how it's taken on board some clear efforts to emphasize atrocity prevention, such as the UN Joint Office framework of analysis for atrocity crimes, the tool for prevention. But since I'm going over my assigned time,
Yes.
I do want to focus on a positive note, namely that there are improvements we're going to see actually at the European Union level. I'm hopeful. In a few weeks, they are going to release what they call the R2P toolkit, the European External Action Service. So perhaps we have slight reasons for ending on a more positive note, and what's referred to as responsibility to protect, is it really marginalized or not lately? I'll stop here.